So this is kind of the big story I wanted to talk about today, is that I'll give you guys, this is the best way I can explain it. I am not a financial guru. I'm not some marketing mad genius. I am a guy that spends all day on the internet looking for news stories and catching up on the news and finding things I like to talk about with you guys. That is my passion. I love it. I'm the happiest dude in the world doing what I'm doing right now, and I've been lucky enough to do this for the past 4 or 5 years. So what I do is I take an overview. I just look at all the news stories. Well, now that I've been stepping back and looking at the finance stuff, I kind of see a same theme, a same thing that's kind of going, which is, you know something, there's a lot going on here, and this isn't good. This isn't good. So I want to talk about that. I'm going to give you a high-level overview, and then you guys will have an idea of kind of what's going on and seeing what I see. And you can make up your own minds what you think about it. I'll tell you what I think, obviously, because that's what I do. From the BBC, a drop in U.S. and Asia stocks. Let me try that again. Hold on,
English, mother, do you speak it?
Shares drop in U.S. and Asia as AI stocks slide. I'm just going to touch on this stuff. I'm not going to do a deep dive into anything. Again, I'm just kind of spraying the field so you can see what's going on. They say financial markets in the U.S. and Asia have fallen sharply as investors sell off shares in technology companies, with artificial intelligence stocks hit particularly hard. In Wednesday's trading in New York, the S&P 500 lost 2.3%, and the tech-heavy NASDAQ fell 3.6%, and their biggest one-day fall since 2022. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped by 12%. The losses were driven by major firms, including NVIDIA, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, and Tesla. Those are 5 of the miracle 7 that are holding up basically the stock market. Okay, so those 5 are 5 of the 7. Their technology, their AI, and everybody, remember, jumped into NVIDIA and it went skyrocketing. Everybody got into this AI stuff and these tech markets because that looked like where all the growth was happening. But now it's falling back. It's falling back in a big way. And I'll do some tie-ins as I go here. But not only are the big stocks falling behind, but also smaller ones as well. But it's not just the tech stocks. Here you can see Lululemon in the last 6 months has dropped 42%. This is a luxury item. I don't know anything about Lululemon other than they're very expensive women's athletic wear. They're like the yoga pants and crap like that. Their stock has fallen off almost 50% in the last 6 months. It's a luxury good. Luxury goods are falling on the wayside. This is Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company's got a crazy story. They just yesterday released earnings for the quarter, and they were down 14%. This from the Morningstar, and this is going back 6 months ago now. This is going back 6 months ago. 7 stocks are holding up the U.S. stock market. Here's why they may soon fall back to earth. And this is from 6 months ago. They say something unusual is happening in the U.S. stock market, and it's making one prominent Wall Street economist nervous. At this point in the year, the notion that the S&P 500 index, the SPX 2030 or 2023 Advance, has been powered by a handful of 7 mega-cap technology stocks is hardly novel. Sometimes it's called the Magnificent Seven. So they say that's Apple, Microsoft, Google, Tesla, and Amazon, Facebook's Meta, and then NVIDIA, right? Those companies are holding up about 30% of the S&P 500. 30%. So you've got 7 companies that are making up the S&P 500's total market capitalization. What that is saying is that there are a whole lot of smaller companies that can be posting losses, and they're struggling and they're having problems. But because people are still investing in the super growers, as it were, like Microsoft and Google and Apple, because they're overvalued, they're basically what's propping up the whole entire market. This from the Glorious Markets investor. What a day. Tech totally got crushed. Magnificent Seven lost almost $2 trillion in market capitalization in just 10 days. He goes over the totals. S&P 500 down 2.3%, NASDAQ 3.6%, Russell 2.1%, Dow Jones down 1.3%. And if I open this image in a new tab, we can see that here's the big ones. Microsoft down 3.8%, NVIDIA down 5.84%, Apple down almost 3%, Google down 4.73%, Meta down almost 5%, Amazon down 3%, Tesla down 11 point some odd percent. So all the big ones, these big guys here, overwhelmingly make up all of the stock in the S&P. So when people are telling you the stock market is great and the S&P is great and everything's great, they're really only reflecting on the biggest of the big. The other ones down here, a lot of them are struggling. Now, yes, obviously there's some green in there that are still doing well. But when you look at JP Morgan and some other what you would consider being big players, these other ones are so much larger that they overwhelmingly are drowning out the actual real market. So how does this relate to real people? We know the stocks are failing. We know people aren't buying as much. You can see Lululemon, Ford, others of their like are losing their shirts. Mistigan said the housing problem is called by hedge funds like BlackRock and Vanguard buying up all the residential buildings and driving the prices through the roof here in Australia as well as America. Yes, that is a thing. Something like 30% of new homes that came on the market, BlackRock and Vanguard bought up, and then they're trying to rent them out. So they're driving home prices up. They're also driving rent up. That is very accurate. Okay, so I have this from Peter St. Onge. I like Mr. Peter St. Onge. He is a professor. I don't know if but he is a doctor, and I believe he is an economist. But I do like Professor St. Onge very much. And he explains it in probably a better way than I can. So I'm going to let him give you his opinion, because he's some of the opinions I'm actually listening to.
Evictions are soaring and Americans can't pay the rent, potentially throwing hundreds of thousands of families out of their homes at a time when homeless shelters are jammed to the rafters with 10 million illegal immigrants. A useful reminder that the problem with our ruling elite is not just Joe Biden's dementia. They have made a very big bed we're all going to be lying in. The numbers come from the Wall Street Journal, who reports that since the pandemic, evictions are up 15% in 10 of the 33 cities they survey. In a half dozen major cities, including Houston, Phoenix, and Las Vegas, evictions are up 35% since pre-pandemic. Last month, Phoenix landlords filed more eviction notices than the peak of the 2008 crisis. Note, the jump is not nationwide for the simple reason that most blue cities make it nearly impossible to evict a renter who won't pay, meaning the landlord is eating the rent, presumably making plans to sell out since no good deed goes unpunished in the progressive utopia.
I'll let him finish here in just a minute. But what he's basically saying, imagine you're a landlord, and you can either A, sell your business to BlackRock, Vanguard, make a ton of money. Okay, you might do that. Let's say that you've been told you can't collect rent, or you can't kick anybody out that hasn't paid rent for the last year or two during the bug. And then when it comes time to collect, you're owed, each tenant might owe you for the last year or two anywhere between $15,000 and $30,000, and maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 of them that didn't pay you. All of a sudden, you're $200,000 in arrears, and you're trying to play catch up just to keep yourself on board. That is one way of looking at it. Now, yes, again, there might be some bad landlords. I've had bad landlords in the past, but when you're down in the South, and there's an influx of, number one, immigrants coming in. And on top of that, you have the government going to apartment buildings, going to hotels, going to these places and saying, we will pay you top dollar to house these people. You can say, okay, I'm going to house illegal immigrants and get paid top notch, or I don't want my place destroyed, so I'm going to rent it to, citizens here. but I'm going to charge as much as the government would pay me to house an illegal immigrant. So who do you blame in that case? Yes, you can say the evil landlord, but you could also say, well, the government for letting millions more people that need places to live come here. You can blame BlackRock and Vanguard for paying top dollar for all these properties, so that drives it out of the hands of the average buyer. You can blame it on a lot of the people, but solely blaming it on the landlords is the wrong thing. But that's what the left does. And what happens when they come in and price control? Well, current landlords quit, and new landlords that might want to come in and buy a place and rent it out, they say they're not going to do it because it's too risky. He gets into this for a moment.
This all means unpaid rent is rising much faster than evictions. The eviction bans are hiding it. To give a sense, the Seattle Housing Authority reports low-income tenants with overdue rent is up 322% since pre-pandemic. Seattle's Low-Income Housing Institute estimates it's up 559%. What's driving it, of course, is the doubling of housing costs from the money printing order that took the number of dollars in existence from $15 trillion in 2019 to nearly $21 trillion today. A 40% increase, that means $1 in $3 has fresh ink on it. Toss in the Fed's rate hikes that took mortgages from 3% to 7.5%, along with property tax and home insurance that's soaring above inflation, and you've got the perfect storm that is knocking people out of the game and onto the street.
So what's happening is it's punishing the renters, but it's also punishing the landlords. It's punishing everybody because of both the inflation and the interest rate. And if you guys remember, I talked about a couple years ago in one of my videos, I talked about stagflation. And some of the comments pushed back on me saying they thought I was wrong, but it wasn't my opinion. It's listening to people like the professor here that are saying what's happening is that if you have interest rates that have soared in gas, in food, in housing, and other things, and home insurance and renters insurance and cars, the average price of a car now is $45,000. When all that happens, the value of money gets very weak. And so for whether you're a homeowner or anybody else, you need to make more, spend more. The value of the dollar's just weakened. And it's hurting the landlords, it's hurting the renters, it's hurting everybody that owes any money as far as payment-wise, because the inflation is still high and the interest rates are high enough to be painful, but they haven't jacked up the interest rates high enough to stop the money printers. And so the inflation's still going, the interest rate is high, and really what you need to do is like Volcker did back in the 80s, which is jack interest rates so high that all borrowing freezes, that some companies fail, that the failures happen, everything comes crashing down, and from the rubble, the strongest and the most profitable survive and can grow and flourish. If you guys, I know probably some of you are from Australia. In Australia, they have these bushfires. You get brush fires. They get these huge, massive fires that are really, really bad. But from that, you get some beautiful growth coming out of it. The same thing happens occasionally if you look at like out in Hawaii when there's a lightning strike or something. All the dead underbrush and the worthless stuff that's all dry and dead, that's just laying there, that's not doing anything except taking up space and shielding the forest floor from the sunshine. That stuff burns off, and a lot of trees get wrecked and the whole thing, but afterwards things come back stronger and better than before. Well, they're not letting anything fail. They're keeping everything propped up. So we still haven't failed from 2008. The 2008 failure still hasn't happened. It was a hiccup, but it still hasn't completely failed. And so the machine is deathly ill, and something's going to go seriously wrong.
So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. Housing is not getting any cheaper, but the economy is getting worse, meaning jobs, incomes, and ability to pay the rent. In a recent video, I mentioned major banks are now projecting both ongoing inflation and higher interest rates, which will continue to pump up housing costs.
That is the game changer right there. That's the one that ends everything. They say higher interest rates. The banks are now projecting both ongoing inflation and higher rates. When you've got both, that's stagflation. And it grinds everything to a halt. It's almost like instead of just letting something, crash and burn and then growing from the rubble, it's just keeping this sick machine going and going and going, and it's really hurting a lot of people.
Higher interest rates, which will continue to pump up housing costs that will pass on to rents. So it's going to get worse for renters, of whom nearly half are already, quote, cost burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing and utilities. 1 in 3 renters spend over half their income on rent. If the income falters, the rent won't get paid. Now, you might think that with an election looming, Washington would be trying to pitch in and fix it, perhaps cut back on the artillery for Ukraine, or the million-man migrant shelters to bring down inflation and rates, or perhaps even making it easy for landlords to protect themselves so more people are willing to convert their basement apartments. Of course, Washington is doing no such thing. Instead, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, just announced a $40 million program to hire lawyers to force landlords to eat the rent even when the renter has no intention of ever paying, which hides the problem, it's true, at the expense of bankrupting tens of thousands of landlords and sending a clear message to any future landlord to never ever rent to anybody who stands the remotest chance of not paying the rent. That slams the door on blue collars, recent grads, and young families hoping to find a place to live that isn't mom's basement. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.
So I do like his I do like his information. It's put in a very nice way. I like listening to the guy. I had to move my box corner to the other side, and I figured I'd do something stupid and or funny at the same time. But he does bring up a good point. You've got house prices are absolutely soaring. Look at this that I have. This is from Bloomberg.com. Starter homes. Starter. That's supposed to be the cheap, small, first-time buyer house is a starter home. My first starter home was $140,000. That's how much I paid back in, 2013, I think, 2013, 2014. That was my first home. Before that, I was a renter. I moved too much to own. And then I got a job, and I was like, okay, I'm going to stay in an area for a while and hopefully get some friends because reasons. My first starter home was $140,000, and that was near RTP, which is near Raleigh, North Carolina. RTP is the Raleigh or Research Triangle Park. That's where like Cisco and some data centers and Microsoft and IBM. There was a bunch of corporations there. I drove 10 minutes to work, and it was a $140,000 house. Here we are 10 years later, and they say starter home prices top $1 million in more than 200 U.S. cities. They say first-time buyers are having to contend with seven-figure home prices amid low inventory and high borrowing costs. So as a matter of fact, I have a graph here that shows it kind of well. Not that one, this one. Look at this graph, okay? Now this is for, let me zoom out a little bit here. Let me do it this way. Well, I'll do it this way. If you look here, this shows the home price. Down here is $280,000 as a home price at 7% interest. Over here is a home price for $462,000 at 2.8 interest. At the top it says the value of a house as interest rate changes, $850 payment. So what used to happen is that when you had interest rates at 2.6, 2.8, an $1,850 payment got you $462,000 worth of house. Now with today's interest rates, that $1,850 a month only gets you a $280,000 house. A different way you could say it is today, if you can only spend $1,850 for your house payment, just a few years ago you could afford almost a $500,000 house. Today you can only afford a $280,000 house. Another way you could say it is for $1,850 you can now afford a $280,000 house, but for $1,100 or $1,200 you can't afford any house. And that's what's happening to people. And I'll let them give you their insight as to what's going on.
How do you plan to really restart this housing economy at a time where many people believe we're in a pretty serious affordability crisis?
I think we are in a serious affordability crisis. We have, depending upon which economist you talk to, somewhere between a 3 and 5 million shortfall of supply of housing units against the demand that's there. So when these markets are out of balance, when any market is out of balance between supply and demand, you get price appreciation. And that's what we've seen since the pandemic. House prices are up 20%. Typically over the long term, over the last 200 years of American history, house prices appreciate on average about 2% per annum. In the last 3 years, we've seen house price appreciation of 20% and rent appreciation as well. Because
this is what happens when, number one, you open up the borders and you get millions and millions more people coming across needing a place to stay. And then you add on top of that the government paying for these people top dollar to put immigrants in homes, illegal immigrants in homes. And then you have BlackRock offering top dollar for houses to buy them and turn around and rent them out for more than it would cost you for a mortgage. All of those things combined create this perfect storm of expensive to buy, expensive to rent. The people that maybe even own it, that want to rent it out, the cost of insurance for their home, for the building, for the land. You do have to have other insurance liabilities for your property to rent it out. That's gone up. Everything's going up. And it is kind of turning into a perfect storm that will end up collapsing a lot of things.
Because there's such an imbalance between supply and demand. And so, it depends on markets. Austin, because of the move of various people during the pandemic to Austin had a surge of multifamily housing development. And now rents are softening because the market is coming into better balance. But that's not true in many parts of the country, both rural and urban markets, because of this just enormous shortfall in housing availability.
I looked at a map of like Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Texas, about migration within the country. All those areas were spiked extremely high. Tennessee, 0 state income tax. Florida, 0 state income tax. Tennessee, Texas, 0% state income tax. Plus they're more conservative. Plus they're more rural. Plus they're more small town. So businesses and people moved from New York, from California, from other places. Vermont, more people are leaving now because of the taxes up there, and they're moving to these other areas. So that means the prices in the most expensive areas of the country are coming down a little bit, but the prices in the softest, most affordable areas are going up a lot. And so now what's happening is you'd think the markets would adjust, they'd price adjust a little bit, but they can't. And the reason why they can't is because BlackRock is screwing with everything. BlackRock and Vanguard, they're screwing with things. They're coming in, buying up 30% of the houses and then putting them out for rent. And on top of that, you've got the government are still going crazy, printing millions, billions, and trillions of dollars. At the same time, interest rates are going up. And so it is turning into a nightmare. And what I think is most important, and this is the key takeaway, understand right now that the government is not accurate about about the labor employment. Biden came out and said, "Oh, 16 million jobs since I came in office." A bunch of those were recovery jobs because of the bug. Many of those are many of those are underemployed, meaning they're part-time workers, not full-time workers. They used to be full-time, now they're part-time. That is actually a loss in GDP and production. And I think it was 1.2 million of those jobs went to people that are here illegally. And so they're either paid under the table or they're paid minimum amounts. And so that's filling up the job market. And so everything's getting out of balance. And like he says, it's out of balance. And so for companies, what they're doing right now is they're building and they're building and they're building, trying to play catch up. Do you remember what happened in 2008? In 2008, home prices were going up. Builders came out and they started building and building and building. And these construction companies and financial firms that financed that, they all went bankrupt because what happened is they built all these homes for people to buy. People couldn't afford them. Unemployment skyrocketed. The houses sat there empty. A bunch of loans went upside down because people that couldn't pay for these things were given loans, and they're doing it all again. Right now, I'll show you a chart I have. Right now, fewer homes than almost ever are being sold, and more homes than ever are being built. So you'd say to yourself, well, this is going to fix itself. They're building tons of homes, and right now homes are not being sold. Fewer homes than ever are being sold. Well, this is a good thing. But the reason why fewer homes than ever are being sold is not because that there's too small a supply. There's a huge supply, but no one can buy them because of the interest rates on financing. And if they try to pay less, they can't because the homes would be underwater. We're going to see 2008 all over again and then some. And so now this dingbat lady on here, on this video, she's going to tell you, well, this is great. This is capitalism at work. This must be a capitalist's dream. Except it's not, because BlackRock and Vanguard are screwing it up. The interest rates are screwing it up. The federal government overprinting money is screwing it up. The influx of 10 million people, or plus a lot more, coming in is throwing it off. There's a whole lot of factors that capitalism can't work as it's supposed to because it's being screwed with.
Shortfall in housing availability.
What you're pitching is sort of a capitalist dream in the sense that it is sort of a public-private partnership of sorts. How do you, though, encourage builders to get into the places that matter? We had this amazing story on the Bloomberg Terminal yesterday about how the real estate market is broken for everyone except the ultra-rich. Affordable housing.
The ultra-rich, meaning BlackRock, Vanguard, and people with millions of dollars.
Houses for everyone who lives in a suburb outside of a city in particular. How do you encourage people to build in those areas?
Well, you got to break the imbalance between supply and demand, because if you have excess supply.
Okay, here's exactly my point. U.S. homes on the market, U.S. home sale inventory is almost the lowest. Look how low it is. That's the number of homes on the market. So you'd normally think, my gosh, it's down 45%, 46% in the last 20 years. There must not be any homes. Wrong. There's tons of homes, but no one can afford them because of the interest rates and the dollars losing value. If I buy a house, let's say $1, okay, this is going to sound weird, but stay with me. $1 is worth exactly $1. We'll call it just one-to-one parity. You buy a house for $20,000. Now let's say the dollar's value goes to 50 cents, meaning the dollar goes half as far as it used to. If eggs cost you $2, they now cost $4. If milk costs you $4, it now costs $8. If a car cost you $20, it now costs you $40. The person that has a home valued at $200,000 says, I want $400,000 for my home. That's breaking even because the value of the dollar has collapsed. The same thing happens in the stock market. That's the expression was that in Weimar, Germany, they were popping champagne corks on the champagne as they watched the stock market go up and up and up. But it was going up because the money had so much less value. And again, I'm not an expert on this, but I can tell you what I'm seeing. So the person that buys that home for 200 grand wants 400 grand because that's actually now worth 200 grand because the dollar's losing value. A stock that was $100 is now worth $200, but if you sell that stock for cash, the cash will only buy you half of what it used to. So you understand what I'm saying is that like everything's out of balance. So here we've got the lowest U.S. home sales inventory, the lowest in record, because people are trying to sell it and it's on the market for 30 and 60 and 90 days for what they feel they need to get for it. And they may even shave a little bit of money off the top of it, hoping for it to move. And then the young person coming in to buy says, I can't afford this payment, not at 7.5% interest. Ironically, the interest rates really, if we want to quash this inflation, probably should be somewhere between 13 and 15%. If you do that, the housing market is toast. I'll let them finish out and then I'll show you another graph.
Supply, it'll affect the housing costs in all segments, both affordable, middle, and high end. As middle income people move into higher income houses as their income increases, that creates availability. It creates availability. So my idea, and I'm not unique in this, there are a number of people who think this is a needed federal program, is to provide concessionary mezzanine financing. Typically, construction is done 60-40, 60% senior debt, 40% equity. The idea here is to have the government step in and provide a mezzanine layer of 20%, allowing the equity to be slightly more levered.
Through Fannie Freddie.
That destroys everything. That's what China did. China started doing that. And it ruined everything. So this guy's talking about more interference with government. That is the last thing you want to do. And guess what this chart is? You'll never guess. This says the number of units of homes for sale in the United States. Now, you might say to yourself, well, if we look at the number of homes right now that are available. Let me correct that. Not for sale, that are available. The ones that are going on market and off market and aren't being sold, and the ones being built and everything else. You'll notice that we are basically right where we were for number of homes, thousands of units seasonally adjusted, as we were in February of 08. You guys know what happened in 08, and here was the tumble that happened over the next couple of years. Well, here we are right here. We're a little bit lower. We're not quite at the peak of 08. But part of the reasoning of that is because the interest rates. And now builders are going crazy. So builders are going crazy building a bunch, but people still can't afford to buy them because of the interest rates. This is from the Kobayashi letter. Breaking home builders now have 102,000 completed and unsold homes for sale on the market, the highest since 2009, according to Reventure. This comes at a time when mortgage demand is at its lowest level in 30 years. The homes are in demand. They have 102,000 brand new homes that are completed and unsold just sitting there. And in the meantime, no one's buying them. Why? The interest rates and the cost of these homes, because the lumber and the materials are so expensive and the labor is so expensive. They say, meanwhile, there are a whopping 247,000 new homes under construction. So they're adding 250,000 more homes. They have 100,000 already built, not being sold. and mortgage demand is at its lowest in 30 years. They're making a bunch of homes, a metric buttload of homes for a bunch of people that can't afford them. They can't afford them because of the interest rates and money printer going burr and the value of the dollar getting crashed. They say this is just 62,000 less homes under construction than at the peak before the '08 financial crisis. They say new home supply is skyrocketing in a market where mortgage demand is plummeting. A record 1 out of 3 homes for sale right now is new construction. And he says price cuts are coming soon. But here's the problem. If I own a home that I paid $200,000 for, I'm not going to sell it for less than $200,000. And maybe calculating in the costs for the real estate lady and all the rest of the crap, I say I'm going to sell it for $250,000. And the new homes coming on the market, they can't be sold for less because the labor was at the peak of expensive. You know, right now wages are higher than they've been in an extremely long time. So you've got the people making the house, the actual laborers, they're the most expensive. The materials for the house are the most expensive. And so you can't sell it for a new house, you can't sell for a loss. And then the people coming in can't afford it anyway because of the interest rates. So he says price cuts are coming soon. I think it's going to be another crash. You know, he's only looking at one portion of this, but and here's another update he has. This is again from the Kobayashi letter. Their industry-leading commentary on the global capital markets. He says 11% of consumers with 90-day plus new delinquencies of FHA single-family loans cited unemployment as their main reason, the most in over 16 years. So now you've got home delinquency at one of the highest rates it's been in the last 16 years. Does anybody remember what happened 16 years ago? I do. It was called, 2008. That's what happened 16 years ago. So now you've got a record number of homes being listed, a record number of homes that are new construction waiting to be purchased, a record number of homes being built, and a record high interest rate where nobody can afford them, and you've got record low demand for mortgages. The only people that can buy all these houses, that means, is cash buyers. And ironically, BlackRock and Vanguard are not buying any more homes. They're actually trying to dump some of them because they can't get it. They bought them to rent out, and they can't get anybody that can afford to rent them. Here they show the graph. So now they're talking about another 10% of all houses that are financed right now, 90 days plus delinquent. That's another metric ton of homes going out on the market. They say an FHA loan is a type of mortgage for borrowers with lower credit scores or who do not qualify for a conventional loan. This share has increased 5 times in less than 2 years and is above 2008 levels. There's more people that can't pay their mortgage now in these FHA loans than in '08. And remember, it was the poorer people that couldn't afford conventional loans that brought on the '08 crash. And we're right there again. We're doing the same damn thing all over again. They say overall the FHA loan delinquency share is at 10.4%, near the highest since 2001, and just slightly below the 14.2% peak in '09. On the other hand, delinquencies on single-family residential mortgages was 1.7 in 2024, the lowest since 2006. And it basically says Americans with lower credit scores are struggling. Those are the first-time buyers. Those are the ones with the FHA loans. Those are the ones that would be buying this new construction. Those are the ones that need mortgages. It's all falling apart. It's all falling apart.